Welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and today we're going to be talking about this miniature over here. Now, this miniature was provided by Fantasy of Flight back when my game store was open as part of a set that we wanted to have in the store for teaching purposes. 6+ years ago. Now, real quick before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and put down a base coat while I talk about the last few weeks. Though I've been doing a lot of these state of the algorithm addresses, I'm doing an experiment to see if uploading every single week increases the overall viewership of the actual videos that I'm putting out. You'll notice that I typically get a real video out every other week. Sometimes I am able to get out a real video every single week, but for the most part, you're getting one of these state of the algorithm addresses every other week, and you're getting a real video every other week. That's an experiment to see if I can boost the viewers by making sure I upload every single week. Now, I'm not expecting these state of the algorithm addresses to be getting good views. In fact, I expect them to get rather poor views, or at the very least, people are clicking in, immediately realizing what it is, and then clicking out. And I'm perfectly fine with that. But what I have noticed is that my overall views on YouTube for my actual videos are going up. And this kind of confirms my suspicion that I've had for a long time, and some information that's been out there to the public for a while, and that is that YouTube punishes people that don't upload every single week. Now, there does seem to be a point where your channel kind of gets big enough where that punishment can be ignored and it's not really a big deal. But unfortunately for most YouTubers like myself that are small channels or people that are just getting started, this does mean that unless you're uploading every single week, you're kind of just spinning your wheels, and it's one step forward and one step back, or a half step back, or two step forward and one step back, and it's just this constant crab bucket of like slipping back down the metaphorical hill and never really making a lot of forward progress unless you just happen to be in the right place at the right time and upload a video that happens to do dam busters. This does happen to put us in a bit of a tricky spot though, because this has resulted in me burning myself out in a way that I have not experienced in a while. I really enjoy the hobby, and when I'm not doing the hobby, I want to do the hobby. When I'm not painting miniatures, when I'm not putting together miniatures, I feel like I should be doing that. And when I'm not working on a YouTube video, I feel like I should be working on a YouTube video. But recently, while doing those things, I've felt like I'm wasting my time and spinning my wheels and should be doing something else. And so a mixture of this pressure from the algorithm, plus this mixture of like a full life schedule, which is something I've not had to deal with in a while, but it's kind of like kicking off the imposter syndrome and kicking off the burnout at the same time, and these two things are combining together into something nasty that I'm not really sure I've ever had to deal with before. We're not going to be talking about the exact colors we're using in today's video, because that's not really the focus of this video. But just know that this white does have some green in it, and I'll also be using a white later that's got some purple in it, and I'm doing that as a way of creating a mother color or a lock color, as I've heard some people refer to it as. This is a technique that exists inside of art that a lot of artists have been using for years, where they take their base coat and they mix it into all their highlights and shadows in order to unify the piece. In my case here, I wanted to unify it from two different angles. I wanted its underbelly to be unified in one color, and I wanted its scales to be unified in another, which is why I'm using lots of greens and I'm using lots of purples. Now, the rider in this case is going to get painted up just like all the other skeletons from this miniature line, so that's something that is going to stand out, and I'm hoping that's going to draw your eye to the rider while also making this miniature stand out on its own, this worm stand out on its own. I don't want the two objects kind of blending together like what sometimes happens when you have miniatures writing other miniatures. I want them to be their own stories. Typically I would paint the belly of this creature in like a dirt color, but I wanted to kind of bring the purple from the carapace into the body of the worm, but I also wanted to show that maybe perhaps that the worm isn't used to traversing different textures. Perhaps this worm is used to rooting through dirt its whole life, and so its belly is kind of irritated, which is why I've kind of glazed in this purple on the belly. I probably could have taken this a lot farther by taking various blues and reds and blending those in and making it look more like bruising and things like that, and maybe put a dry brush back over it. But I didn't want the worm to be the focus, or at least I didn't want its body to be the focus. I wanted its face and the rider to be the focus of this miniature, so I didn't go super over the top with the belly, and this isn't going to be a showpiece anyway. This is just going to be a tabletop piece. A little bit of context just for you guys from the very beginning. This miniature technically was provided by Fantasy of Flight. Now, there was no incentive for me to make a video about this. They aren't sponsoring this video. They simply gave me this miniature as part of the starter set originally back when the game store opened. They were hoping that I was going to paint them up and then use them for display purposes as well as for teaching people how to play RuneWars. And then its launch ended up having a bit of a flat launch kind of everywhere, just due to some circumstances that were kind of outside of their control. But they initially reached out to me after seeing my eye tyrant that I had painted for a friend a few years prior, and that was kind of what they wanted to see what I could do, so they sent me this. And I just really never got around to it until now. We ended up painting up a copy for the store eventually anyway, but I wasn't the one who painted it, so I wanted to go ahead and do my own twist on this, and this is my copy of the game that I'm planning to use for D&D. So I'm planning to go a little bit more all out in certain circumstances than what I typically would for a war game, as I know that oftentimes the big miniatures are kind of the focus of the fire and tend to get pulled off the table pretty quick. So I don't always put a ton of time in on these bigger figures unless they're like commanders or something that can be a bit of a bullet sponge, so to speak. But in the case of this guy, he might be a solo figure that's going to be on the table for a while in a D&D game, and I wanted to give him a little extra love. Originally, I thought I was going to end up glazing in much darker purples and really darkening up the carapace almost to this purpley black color with some very sharp contrasty highlights, but I decided to not push it that far. The sculpts of these figures are kind of cartoony, and I find that when I get into these extreme contrast paint schemes with characters that tend to look a little cartoony, that I personally never end up liking the way that they look. Other people have great success. For me, it's not the way that I enjoy painting, and then I never end up enjoying the final product. So I decided to keep things a little bit brighter for this color scheme, and I decided to add some purple and blue together to create my darkest color, and then highlight up through the purple range from there. Shortly after I finished this layer, I started to burn out bad. Well, have you ever gotten a little bit into a miniature that you were really excited to start, and then just suddenly there's just no drive behind it anymore? That doesn't happen to me very often, and in most cases I just put the miniature away and go get a new one and work on it, and then when I feel the creative juices flowing again, so to speak, I come back to the model. But I've been putting this one off a lot the last couple of weeks. In fact, I wanted to put this video out a while ago, but I just kept putting it off. I just didn't want to work on the miniature. And today's video really isn't just like an experiment to see what happens when I force myself to finish a model, because I've seen what that looks like. In fact, there's plenty of models on YouTube here that I have done that are that, whether it was obvious in the video or not. Nothing ever really gets phoned in. I don't like phoning in my work. I think it's pretty obvious when I do that. But we're gonna try and do this model justice despite not having the drive or the motivation. And hopefully when the video is all said and done, it'll look good. I have faith in my abilities, but hopefully the drive at least kicks back in at some point in the middle of the project. In any case, I just wanted to be really honest with you guys here about this miniature and my feelings about it. It's nothing against the sculpt of the miniature or the artist who made it. It's just a weird form of burnout I've never really had to deal with before. Usually when I get burnout, I just don't want to do anything hobby related. And that's not the case. I really want to do something hobby related, but I don't know what I want to do. And I'm hoping that by finishing this miniature, it kind of gets me back into the feeling of wanting to paint again. In any case, let's crack on. I think part of where my burnout has come from is I normally take a vacation through the month of January, and I don't paint anything in January. In fact, I usually don't paint anything through the second half of December. I pre-record a video to release around Christmas, and then I don't record anything until February, or if I do start recording in January, it doesn't get uploaded until February. And I think not taking a break this year has walloped me because of my desire to try and appease the algorithm by uploading every single week. In any case, I thought I would try to tackle this by doing a live stream over on TikTok. Normally when I'm experiencing burnout, if I live stream my work, I tend to want to work on it more because the idea of someone watching and trying to keep up with what I'm doing is a great contributing factor for making me want to finish my work. However, typically on TikTok, I will sit down for 6 or 8 hours to stream, take a short break, and then stream for another 4 hours. And that's a lot of painting. But I got an hour and a half into this one and just wasn't feeling it anymore. I didn't really get a whole lot done, and I was just kind of burnt and done. And I actually, the day that I'm editing this is the day that I've also finished the model. Despite the fact that I am very proud of the final result, and despite the fact that I feel I have put out a good miniature and that I haven't phoned anything in, I still feel burnt out. Like, I don't want to work on a video next week. I don't want to work on a video the week after. But something has to go out or the algorithm is going to can me. And you guys, I know you always tell me, hey, if you need a break, take a break. But the reality is that the algorithm doesn't care. If I take a 2 or 3 week break, when I come back, the first 4 or 5 videos I upload for the next month and a half will get seen by no one. And because of how much time I tend to sink into a miniature and how much time I have to edit a video, I don't have the ability to pre-record 7 or 8 videos and take 2 months off. I just don't have that ability. I don't have any friends that have any editing skills, and there's enough voiceover work that I've got to do to be able to knock these videos out that I basically just have to make them myself. In any case, that's enough sob storying. As you can see, I'm laying down some black on all of these claws. I'm going to end up highlighting that later on with some of that white green that I use for the body. I dry brush them kind of loosely all over, and I feel that that does a great job at, blending them into the world and making them feel like they belong on this miniature. I probably could have left them as solid black, but it felt like there was missing something by just being that solid black, so I wanted to add that dry brush later on to add a little bit of oomph. Especially once you see what I do to the mandibles, I think it all kind of blends in really nicely. I have no plans to really go into depth about how I painted the rider because I painted him the exact same way I've painted all the other figures, and I'll go ahead and put a link somewhere in this video about these riders, so if you want to check out how I painted them. I kind of slap chopped them together despite my love-hate relationship with slap chop. I think it's great for doing stuff like what I did with bulk miniatures. It's a really great way to knock out stuff, and it's a really great jumping off point to add a lot more detail down the road if you want to, which we probably will be doing once I go ahead and base these and add all the weathering, which I'm going to do in its own video down the road, which is one of the reasons why you don't see me adding any basing to this miniature at any point in the video. Moving on to the mouth, I went ahead and painted it with a bright pink. You could use something like Monster Maw from Reaper to be able to get this same color. And then of course I'm painting all of those little teeth bright white. And then I end up hitting that with all kinds of Nurgle rot to kind of look like spit and saliva and all that nasty stuff. I'm also going to be using that Nurgle rot all over all the little pustules and boils all over the body. Now I do end up coming back to the mouth and adding a little bit of glaze of red just to kind of add some depth to the maw. A lot of people were suggesting that I should add blood, but honestly I think that would have been a little over the top. I don't think it needs a ton of blood. I don't see this creature eating anything, as its harness is actually a sword through the middle of its neck, and I don't think it would have the ability to swallow anything anyway, even if it did. I started with this stippling effect that I did all over the carapace, pretty much anywhere where there was even remotely a hard line, anything that broke up the shape of the carapace, I did this stippling effect. Now this is the original purplish blue base tone, mixed with some of that white purple I mentioned earlier in the video. And I believe it's a ghost purple from Reaper, if I remember correctly. I mixed those two colors together. And the more that I do this stippling and the more it starts to blend together, the more I realize that this looks very similar to how I do rough cut stones or rough cut gemstones when I'm trying to paint those sort of things, when I'm wanting something that looks a little bit more on the natural side. And the more I really started to like this carapace, so I continued forward with the stippling technique, despite well knowing that this was going to destroy my brush. I'm going to have to do some serious brush care after this to try to get the tip back in my brush, because it just almost annihilated this brush, and I've been using this brush for a long time. It's one of my favorite brushes, so definitely gonna have to show this brush some care after this, because it did a great job at conveying what I wanted on this miniature, and it really put its heart and soul in on this carapace, because there's a lot of stippling, just a lot of stippling. Now, I did come back in with some of that ghost purple and stipple a couple of places sporadically, anywhere where a lot of lines met together, as well as any scars that might have been on the carapace. Now I could have gone in and added more scratches and things like that myself, but I didn't feel the need to do that. I thought the carapace already looked just fine the way that it was, with the amount of contrast that it had, and I thought that less would be more in this case, and that I didn't really need to take things over the top. Now, I really wasn't happy with the body at this point. It didn't quite feel maggot-like. Maggots kind of have that feeling, that I don't want to touch that kind of a look, you know? And so I realized that if I just added a little bit of Seraphim Sepia mixed in with some contrast medium, that would probably get me within the ballpark. Now, I didn't want to go too over, because I know that I'm probably going to revisit the washes when I go to do all of the weathering and the basing for these miniatures down the road. So I didn't want to go too heavy on this now and then kind of limit myself on the types of stuff that I was going to be able to add to it later during the basing process. So I went real light with this and did just enough to the point where I kind of got that icky feeling when looking at it and realized that that was good enough. In fact, that's typically what I do anytime I paint something gross. The second I start to feel kind of icky when I look at it, I realize that I'm doing a good job, and that's probably a great place to stop. Because I don't want to take it to Hollywood horror movie town and go way over the top. One of the last things I did was the maw, these big pincers on the front. I had this envisionment of adding a little bit of green in, and so I worked with a few different shades of green and really kind of glazed it in, and then did that scratchy effect that I did on the carapace on that maw as well. And that did a really great job. And I'm using that same white green that I used on the body, and I'm just layering it on and stippling it on along the edges. And I think it just brings a whole lot to it. And then I had the idea of putting this mild glaze of that moot green on top of everything, and it just brings it together. I absolutely love the way the mouth on this creature ended up looking once I did that, and I was really on board with this miniature from that point forward, which was great because I felt like I was done, and I was so burned out I was ready to be done. So I'm glad I was able to end this miniature on a high note. And there we have it, the Carrion Lancer, done. Now, that having been said, I still have one more hero character, well, I should say villain character, from the starter box yet, that I still need to finish for just this army. That having been said though, I do have the human faction that still needs to be done. And they've got a lot of horses. I've never painted horses. And I know some of you are going to say, well, just paint them all brown or paint them all white, but I'd like to give them some variety. So at some point down the road here, we're going to have to learn how to paint horses. Might as well learn now, considering the fact that I still have a Learn to Play Lord of the Rings starter box set that also has horses in it. Which is, again, another reason I've been putting that box off, because there are a lot of horses in that box too. In any case, that's enough of horse dread. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed the way that it turned out, but I did not enjoy the process. I am burned out. So I think the next couple of videos I'm going to do are going to be hobby related, but I don't think I'll be painting miniatures, and that's just a way for me to take a break. Hopefully you guys understand. In any case, until next time, may your display case always be filled and your pile of shame never run empty. I'll see you in the next video.